Brexit is in danger of being derailed by establishment globalists. A snap election called by controversial UK Prime Minister Theresa May to ostensibly help the Conservative, Tory, party gain a larger majority in Parliament has resulted in what is being painted as a humiliating defeat, sparking calls for her resignation and for a rethink of Brexit. While the Tories are still the largest bloc in the UK House of Commons, they lost their majority. Ultra-far-left leader Jeremy Corbyn and his Labour Party, who said they would honour the Brexit vote as well, picked up most of the seats lost by Conservatives. What exactly the stunning election results mean for the British exit from the European Union, known as Brexit, is not yet clear. But with May focusing on curtailing fundamental freedoms under the guise of terror, more than a few globalists are working to exploit the general election result to undermine British voters' clear vote last year for a restoration of self-government via secession from the EU. In fact, some globalist voices are painting that outcome as inevitable, suggesting a soft Brexit non-exit from the EU might be better. A number of voices even suggested the entire election disaster was in fact part of a plot to derail independence. And May, of course, was actually an opponent of Brexit before the referendum. But lead Brexit supporters such as Nigel Farage have vowed to see the independence effort through to a successful conclusion, even if it means getting back into politics. If my worst fears are confirmed, if we don't get the kind of Brexit that I wanted and that people voted for, then I would have no choice but to involve myself again with full-time campaigning, said former UK Independence Party leader Nigel Farage, perhaps the most important figure in the successful British vote to leave the EU superstate, in an interview with the BBC blasting May and her decision to call an early election. "I'm very angry this morning. We were on course for Brexit, and suddenly we may not be." The British snap election this week was not even necessary. But, with polls showing that the Conservative Party would crush the Labour Party under the leadership of its radical chief, May was supposedly hoping to strengthen her position ahead of upcoming negotiations with the EU for Brexit. Instead, the Tories were crushed, relatively speaking, losing 13 seats in Parliament, along with their outright majority from 2 years ago, which left them at just under 49% support. Corbyn and his Labour Party, meanwhile, picked up a dozen seats, giving them 40% control. Minor parties kept the rest. So far, May has resisted calls to resign her post after the disastrous showing. "I will now form a government that can provide certainty and lead Britain forward at this critical time for our country," she said, promising to move ahead with Brexit and with the recently outlined Tory plot for a global censorship regime to regulate speech and ideology on the internet. May has no intention of quitting, she said. But more than a few analysts and lawmakers have suggested her departure may be inevitable, setting up a leadership contest. Now, with the Tories holding less than 50% of the seats in the hung parliament, they are being forced into a coalition with a minor party. The most likely candidate to join the ruling coalition, according to media reports, is the Democratic Unionist Party, which won 10 seats and just 1.5% of the vote, enough to give them a bare majority. The DUP, a centre-right party from Northern Ireland, supported Brexit, but it is not yet clear what concessions it may demand from the Tories to form a coalition. The globalist narrative being pushed by establishment voices and propaganda organs is that, after the election, the best UK voters can hope for now is a fake Brexit that leaves Britain under the thumb of Brussels in everything but name. Indeed, the scam being promoted by globalists and their useful idiots is being described as a Brexit in name only. Essentially, under that proposed scheme, Britain would formally leave the EU, but would remain ensnared in most of its sovereignty-stealing mechanisms, including the single market, the customs union, and the European Court of Justice. The phony Brexit being pushed by globalists would still force the people of the United Kingdom to live under the EU's never-ending avalanche of decrees, in addition to open borders. Countless establishment globalists and propaganda mouthpieces were falsely suggesting that the election result was basically a repudiation of Brexit, and that it may force authorities to settle for only partial secession instead. The globalist and statist Washington Post, for example, which still refuses to disclose its Bilderberg attendee owners' well-documented contracts with the CIA even on stories involving the CIA-backed EU, quoted establishment globalists such as Ian Kearns with the Labour Party and the Globalist European Leadership Network to suggest the election meant Brexit may not happen. At the very least, Kearns and other observers said Friday, May will have to thoroughly rethink her plans for Brexit only days before critical talks with the European Union are due to launch, the Post claimed without balancing the phony narrative with any reality-based views. An uncompromising demand for a hard break from Europe may have to be downgraded to a far more modest rupture, Kearns said, perhaps even one that doesn't look much like an exit at all. The election outcome, according to the increasingly discredited paper, instantly complicated, if not scuttled altogether, May's meticulously laid strategy for getting out of the EU, while also heightening doubts that she can reach a deal with European leaders over the next 2 years. In case the propaganda did not sink in on first reference, the Post repeated itself using basically the same language. At the very least, May could be forced to rethink her objectives in the negotiations, perhaps pushing for a softer break than the one she had sold to the public this spring, reported the paper. The Post, of course, was purchased by a billionaire globalist and Bilderberg attendee for less than 1/3 of the value of his massive contracts with the CIA, an institution that played a key role in imposing the EU on Europeans to begin with. That was not disclosed. Nowhere in the article was it pointed out that the Labour Party agreed before the election to honour Brexit, either, yet another example of why the Post is increasingly being labelled fake news by informed media consumers. Kearns, the globalist quoted liberally throughout the misleading Post report, then claimed May would have to trash the entire approach to Brexit and go back to the drawing board or face removal. Instead of the clean break from Europe she sought, Kearns said May would find cross-party support for a softer separation that leaves Britain formally outside the EU but with many of the same attachments that define its relationship to the bloc today, the Post reported. But without that sort of pivot, he said, May's time in power is likely running out. Kearns also claimed that if May, who did not support Brexit in the referendum, refused to ditch plans for a real Brexit, she would be removed from power by her own party. But far from rejecting Brexit, more credible analysts said voters were more likely upset with May, a big government-loving establishment globalist who has worked fiendishly to promote globalism and statism. As the New American reported just this week, May unwisely hitched a broad range of totalitarian schemes, including a plot to impose a global censorship regime on the Internet, to her party's platform. In essence, the Conservative Party told voters that if they wanted Brexit, they would have to vote for her party's anti-freedom manifesto that threatens to undermine multiple fundamental rights. And on top of that, Labour agreed to honour Brexit. So the notion that voters were hoping to stop Brexit with their vote is demonstrably false. Farage, the prominent anti-globalist Brexit leader who helped lead the successful vote to ditch the EU, also rejected the bogus globalist narrative that the vote was a repudiation of Brexit by voters. Ultimately, I think the shock we're seeing here tonight is all about personality, Farage told BBC on Thursday night, noting that May was widely viewed as an establishment hack while Corbyn and the Labour Party expressed support for Brexit and painted themselves as an anti-establishment alternative. Numerous other commentators and analysts echoed those views. They want somebody who is for change, Farage explained. And what Theresa May tried to do was to be the establishment figure. Corbyn, I thought through the campaign, looked comfortable in his own skin. He actually appeared to be enjoying it, and the Prime Minister came across as insincere, and frankly, robotic. Asked if he believed May should resign, Farage was unequivocal. Absolutely, Yes, I do, he said. I think she has failed completely. I think she has weakened her own position, not just within British politics, but she's weakened the UK's position with these negotiations. But Farage is not naive, and he expects globalists to take full advantage of the disastrous election result to try to defy the British people and their vote for independence from the totalitarian EU. I have a feeling that what you're about to see is a massive backsliding on Brexit, Farage warned in a TV interview after the vote. I think we're going to see significant backsliding on Brexit, and a lot of very angry people. However, he vowed not to give up on full secession without a fight, even if it meant re-entering the political arena that he was helping to leave behind. The fact that globalists are still scheming to keep Britain trapped in their totalitarian EU superstate is hardly surprising. After generations of lying and deception to impose it on the peoples of Europe, the establishment is not prepared to give up its globalist dream of smashing sovereignty and liberty across the continent and around the world. However, despite the easily discredited narrative pushed by establishment mouthpieces masquerading as media outlets, the people of Britain and the world are waking up in droves. The latest effort to dupe the people of the United Kingdom may even backfire.